Starfield is a game which asks a lot of big questions and provides very few concrete answers across the length of its story. And what's more, when it does provide an explanation for one thing or another, it usually only ends up raising even more questions. That is certainly the case then when the game finally reveals the true identities of the Starborn. Though they start out as enigmatic humanoids with fancy ships, spacesuits and voice-changing helmets, by the end of the game, and obviously spoilers ahead, you end up actually becoming one of them and learning everything that the Starborn know about the temples, the artifacts and the Unity. Which is great, except for the fact that, as it turns out, they don't actually know that much at all. The Starborn, both in the way they come to be and the way they behave, are eventually easy enough to understand within the context of the wider story. But they're also sort of inscrutable, chiefly because no matter how many times you enter the Unity or speak to the Hunter and the Emissary, you will never find all the pieces you need to finish the cosmic puzzle at the center of this universe. With that in mind then, I'm going to do my best to decipher and explain exactly how the Starborn work, as well as what they represent in the story, before getting into the almost limitless questions that I have about them.
Do you think humanity being brought into space was an accident? Our hands may have built the grav drive, but wasn't something else pushing us?
My first encounter with the Starborn in my first Starfield playthrough was at the viewport in New Atlantis. After finishing the opening section of the game and being instructed to visit the lodge, my first instinct when landing in this new city was, like many of you I'm sure, to explore this spaceport and see what I could see. And naturally, I gravitated pretty quickly to this cozy little bar, where bored weapons specialists like to hang out waiting for a new starship captain to whisk them away on an adventure. There, laying low in the corner of the room, was the man, the myth, the legend himself, the Hunter, presumably waiting patiently for the bartender to mix him up a pina colada. If you approach this moody stranger, you can chat briefly about his bleak view of humanity, and you can even tell him his spacesuit makes him look like a tryhard. But ultimately, you're not going to learn a lot here. My first thought during this encounter was, admittedly, how do I get one of those spacesuits? I figured he was probably part of some as yet unknown faction, but given I had just started the game and was still testing its limits, I thought I might as well start a fight with the guy and see if I could walk out of the bar with a new spacesuit. Obviously, that didn't end well, and I ended up losing pretty quickly. But when he started using his space wizard powers, it did become pretty clear at least that he was an important character that I would likely be dealing with later. And deal with him I most certainly did. You can chat with him again in Aquila City, and I wouldn't be surprised if he popped up in other locations that I missed too. But either way, as you follow the Constellation quest and collect the artifacts, the Hunter is eventually going to turn up and give you serious trouble. Because it turns out, despite what I had originally guessed, that he isn't part of some organised extraterrestrial faction with grand cosmic plans at all. He's just a cold-blooded space hooligan. Merciless and inhuman are also words that come to mind. But he is still basically human because all of the Starborn are, as much as I might have wished at first that they were centipede people. Exactly how human they are isn't totally clear, to be frank, because they're obviously not the same as your average chunks-eating, bench-sitting New Atlantis citizen. For starters, they explode into space dust when slain, rather than leaving any sort of body behind. It's not totally clear if they have to eat or sleep to survive either, but given that you can survive the game without eating or sleeping before you become Starborn, I guess that's kind of a moot point anyway. Obviously, the Unity didn't see fit to equip Starborn ships with inbuilt kitchen facilities or a bed, though. To put it as simply as I know how, The Starborn are just human beings blessed with space wizard powers who have traversed the multiverse any number of times. They collected their strange artifacts, assembled them, grav-jumped to the Unity, and emerged from the other side in a new universe as Starborn, with a swanky new spaceship and a fancy outfit. That is, presumably, the same experience that all of the Starborn have been through. And it isn't the most illuminating experience if you're looking for the answer to life, the universe, and everything. It's possible that answer only comes when you've been through the Unity 42 times, but I haven't got there quite yet personally. When you speak to a version of yourself in the Unity about your life and place in the universe, they're generally pretty vague and they're not going to give you a straight answer about who created the temples or anything like that. You might be cosmically empowered, but you're not getting any real answers. All that said, it becomes pretty clear why the Starborn are the way that they are, because they're all still looking for answers too. They've just had more time than you to explore the multiverse. Most of them spend their time hanging around the temples or the artifacts, waiting to shoot you if you try to take them, because they're just obsessed with building the armillary, apparently, as if next time around they'll learn the truth about the creators. The Hunter is the ultimate form of this, and the Emissary stands sort of in contrast in that they're trying to be a little bit more thoughtful about how they find the artifacts and protect them. They're all kind of terrible people in one way or another though, with the one exception, I think, being the other named Starborn we encounter, who is less obviously Starborn because he doesn't wear his nifty spacesuit. Keeper Aquilus is, seemingly though, a version of the Hunter who stopped hunting. We know this much because if you visit him after the Hunter reveals his identity to the player, he admits that he has traversed the multiverse countless times before stopping in this one universe. I'm also pretty sure that Aquilus was the Pilgrim, whose writings you can find on Indum 2 during the main quest. Across those pages, he talks about his various pasts and possible futures, and is obviously tired of the relentless rebirths into new universes. Then he considers stopping, embracing compassion, living, teaching, and bringing others to the light. He talks about building something beneficial in this world, and it seems pretty likely that that something is the Sanctum Universum, which we know has only existed for a couple of decades and was surely founded by Keeper Aquilus. In the Pilgrim's final writing, they direct us to a location which reveals another location where the Hunter and the Emissary are meeting, which is certainly something he'd know if he was the Hunter, and therefore Keeper Aquilus. It just makes sense that the Hunter becoming the Pilgrim would go on to find peace in this universe with the Sanctum, to act as a guide for others. The Hunter becoming the Pilgrim, becoming Keeper Aquilus, is the natural and obvious result of passing through the Unity countless times. I remember finding it a bit strange that the Starborn, when blessed with cosmic powers, still choose to resolve almost every conflict with violence. But Keeper Aquilus is exactly the sort of peaceful space monk that I would expect someone to become after witnessing such cosmic phenomena so many times.
It was a long time until I realized this is where I belonged. In this universe, building the Sanctum.
Toward the end of the main story, the player has to choose whether to side with the Hunter, the Emissary, or neither, as they head for the buried temple to find the last artifact and finish the armillary. This choice is, ostensibly, one of the biggest decisions you have to make in the game. It's arguably presented as the single most important, but I'd argue that the choice in High Price to Pay is a lot more meaningful for most players. This decision can be difficult for the player, not so much because of the available options themselves, but because it's difficult for the player to even parse the arguments presented by either Starborn in the context of the, quite literally, earth-shattering revelations from the previous Constellation quests. It isn't at all clear what siding with the hunter or the emissary will change as you try to reach the Unity, and neither one makes an especially compelling argument for choosing them. Either way, as it turns out, your decision will have very little impact on the way the ending plays out. And yet, I still think it's a really interesting choice to present to the player. Rather than having to worry about the direct results of the available options, you are, more accurately, being asked to take a philosophical stance about your intentions when travelling to the Unity. I won't deny that I would have preferred if there were more dramatic branching outcomes here and in other places in the game. But in this case, and especially considering how the choice serves the New Game Plus story, I think it can be a very meaningful choice for the player. And it also tells us a lot more about what the Starborn represent in the game. Both of these figures, along with all of the nameless Starborn you encounter and fight throughout the game, have all essentially been radicalized by this intense cosmic and spiritual experience. After looping around the multiverse, they have become increasingly stubborn about their convictions. The hunter has become increasingly merciless in their race to the finish line, and the emissary has convinced themselves that they're serving a greater purpose by protecting the artifacts. And of note, of course, is that the emissary can be any of the 4 main Constellation companions, and so it's clear that their whole philosophy is meant to be a natural extension of Constellation themselves, at least in some way. In my first playthrough, I didn't side with either Starborn because I wasn't at all convinced by what they both had to say. Nobody was giving me any answers or telling me what to expect, and I didn't want to commit to a side without knowing what was ahead of me. We had nearly reached the finish line without them anyway, and I was not keen on trusting either one at such a late stage. So I found my way to the last artifact without Starborn help. I entered the Unity and I emerged in a new universe in a new game. Plus, out of intrigue, I proceeded to hurry through the main quest to reach the Unity again a couple of times. As I did, I increasingly realised that this hunter-emissary choice only really becomes wholly relevant and important to the player after they've been through the Unity themselves, and have some understanding of how that recontextualizes the universe. Their philosophies are really a guiding light to the player as they traverse the multiverse and weigh up the advantages and disadvantages of staying in one universe or moving on to the next. The more I play Starfield, the more I feel like the moral quandary presented to players across the vast breadth of its quests and game world is not so much about choosing good or bad, but about choosing what you care about, or whether you care at all. The scale does not stretch from evil to virtuous. It goes from cold-blooded to kind-hearted, and that is emblemized, at least to some degree, by this hunter-emissary choice. There definitely isn't a strictly evil way to play through most of Starfield's quests. One of the game's many quirks, in fact, is that all of the game's main romanceable companions abide by a similarly upright moral code. They have differences of opinion and there is nuance there, but all of them become furious if you accidentally or purposefully kill an NPC, for example. But you can choose in most instances to be basically indifferent. You can almost always just say no thanks when a character asks you for help, and instead spend your time mercilessly navigating the settled systems with uncharitable intentions. Or you can make real efforts wherever you go to help people out and make the universe a better place. I think it's fair to draw the parallel between the Starborn you interact with in the game and Bethesda's expectations of how players will experience Starfield. With the Hunter, the Emissary, and the Pilgrim, Bethesda have clearly presented a path for the player to experience the game beyond the first universe. And rather than hand them everything on a platter, they've asked that player to think about what meaning they want to bring to this world.
Believe me, I've seen many ways this can play out. Go, Starborn. I hope you continue to enjoy your place in this little multiverse of ours.
While we clearly know plenty about the Starborn and what they represent, I'm still left with a lot of questions which keep me up at night. To start with, there are so many aspects of the Starborn rebirth process which are confusing to me. When you enter the Unity and emerge on the other side, you're suddenly wearing a fancy new outfit and flying a cool new ship. And how exactly does that work? I mean, obviously for the game it works as a fun New Game Plus reward, but story-wise, who is providing these outfits and how? Where in the universe is the Starborn tailor hiding? When you appear in a new universe, you also, interestingly, appear at almost the exact moment when you first started your quest. Now, obviously, Bethesda aren't going to create a whole other game set in a different time period to insert here in New Game Plus, but they surely have to have some sort of lore reason why you and seemingly all the other Starborn emerge at exactly this period in time. Is it the presence of all the artifacts? Is it that this is the only time when you can assemble them all? Is it that the moment you first touch an artifact, you leave a timestamp for all future rebirths? The Hunter exists in essentially the same form in every universe you can visit. So what does that tell us about the logic of these rebirths? If I had killed the Hunter just once and he was still present in every other universe, I could take that to mean that he had travelled through them all and the one where I killed him was his last. But it doesn't work like that. If I kill him and then enter the Unity 10 times in a row, he's still there in the next universe. So are they suggesting that once you've entered the Unity, you exist in some form in every universe? Or does this simply mean that in almost every universe, the man who would become the Hunter finds the artifacts and enters the Unity, thus meaning there are almost infinite numbers of him, but they all originate from a different universe? That doesn't sound quite right either though, because the Starborn seem to remember their many travels through the multiverse. The way we, the player, experience it, passing through the Unity throws us out into a new universe where the other version of ourselves has seemingly gone missing, and then each subsequent trip to the Unity throws us out into another different universe. But for it to work the way it seems to for all the other Starborn, we surely must be thrown out into several universes, if not all of them, when we first enter the Unity. And then we can simply only experience them one at a time. If that was the case though, then presumably when a Starborn dies, they're reborn into one of their other forms in another universe. But in this situation, I can't understand what would be the point of trying to reach the Unity again, since dying and turning to Stardust would achieve the exact same effect, surely. It could be that each version of our character exists and lives independently, except that the Hunter specifically talks about having visited hundreds of realities, and that certainly fits with the way the player experiences it too. If it is a linear track though, and the player moves through the Unity entering just one new universe at a time, then that would mean that the Hunter would be unable to pass through the Unity and enter a new universe after we have done so instead. It's possible that the versions of the Hunter we encounter in the other universes we visit could be past versions of him, as in prior to our first universe. But if we stop him from entering the Unity in that universe too, then that would mean two separate endpoints for the character, suggesting they would have to be different versions who have separately been through the Unity. Either way, the Hunter states that in all the universes he has entered, this is the first time he has ever encountered the player's character living long enough to enter the Unity. So we can assume that our player character is a useless idiot in all other universes. Which is an amusing thought, but is probably mainly a way to justify us not encountering a different version of our character in every other universe. That's obviously possible though, since there are always two versions of Keeper Aquilus around with him and the Hunter, and the same goes for whoever the emissary is. And given that the Hunter and Keeper Aquilus are both Starborn versions of the same guy, it seems like it's possible to re-enter a universe you've already been to. I have to say though, the fact that the Pilgrim and the Sanctum Universum exist across all the universes, even though they're the result of one version of the Hunter settling down, is a bit odd. Does that confirm that there are hundreds of versions of that guy travelling the multiverse and eventually settling down? And who actually was the Hunter before he was Starborn anyway, if he only became Keeper Aquilus after that? I also can't help but wonder if the artifacts as part of the armillary get used up when you enter the Unity. Are they just gone from that universe forever then? Or do they go back to their hiding places underground? And if they are gone forever at that point, then what is the limit on the number of people who can use them at any one time? Because surely when I jump to the Unity, that means that everyone on my ship at the time is also doing so. Which means Andrasia is going to appear in a new universe, and so is Amelia Earhart, right? But they're obviously not appearing in the same universe as me, or else I would encounter them. Where would all of their ships appear anyway? In random spots around the universe? And does everyone get their own ship? Because what happens if one of my crewmates enters the Unity and emerges in a new universe with a new ship, but doesn't actually know how to fly? Also, the Hunter and the Emissary claim they have their meetings in every reality. But how can that be true unless both of them are entering the Unity? So if the artifacts actually are used up, then they must be travelling to the Unity together. And why wouldn't you do that anyway? If everyone is allowed to travel to the Unity, so long as they fit on the armillary equipped ship, then why aren't the Starborn just building a big ship and all working together instead of competing with one another? I'm sure that many of these questions and others that you might have don't have concrete answers because they're simply conveniences required to make the game design work. But some of them must. It's possible there are some holes in the plot here and there too, but there's so much complexity to this discussion of multiverses and the Starborn that Bethesda could have intricate explanations for all of these things too. And I'm sure at least a few of my questions do have answers in-game which I've missed. If you think you have any solutions, please do let me know. Ultimately, I think that Starfield is a game which is built around huge cosmic questions. And it makes sense that we never fully understand the Starborn, even after we become one. They are seemingly not, after all, the ones responsible for building the artifacts or the temples which form the foundation of the mystery, with the true creators remaining apparently unknown. Though that is something I'd like to discuss separately at some point in the future. Whatever is going on with the Starborn specifically though, we can say one thing for sure, that this universe was never designed to give us all the answers we want. Rather, it seeks to guide us to find our own meaning.
Figure out your own truth and hold on to it. It could end up being the only constant you have amidst the infinite worlds that will stretch out before you.
How do you feel about this Starborn logic? What do I have wrong here, and what questions can you answer that I couldn't? Let me know in the comments, and please do like and subscribe if you'd like to hear me talk about more video game stuff. Otherwise, I'll see you next time around.